The temperature had dropped to -9 degrees Celsius, and the cold air cut through the forest like a blade. Snow covered the ground, and every breath turned into white mist in the freezing silence. A small crowd stood in a wide circle, their heavy coats wrapped tightly around their bodies as they watched something unusual unfold in the middle of the snowy clearing. In the center stood a tall Viking warrior, his massive frame covered in thick fur armor, his long beard frozen at the edges. In his hand, he held a heavy axe, its sharp steel edge reflecting the pale winter light. His boots pressed deep into the snow as he stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on the man standing across from him. That man was Bruce Lee. Unlike everyone else, Bruce Lee wore light training clothes, standing calmly in the freezing cold as if the temperature meant nothing to him. His breath was steady, his posture relaxed, and his eyes focused with quiet confidence. Snowflakes landed on his shoulders and melted slowly, but he didn't move or react to the cold. The crowd whispered among themselves. Some laughed quietly, others shook their heads. To them, this looked completely unfair. A Viking with a deadly axe facing a martial artist with bare hands in freezing weather. It didn't seem like a real fight. It looked like a mistake. The Viking tightened his grip on the axe and took another step forward, the crunch of snow under his boots echoing through the silent forest. His presence alone was intimidating, and the tension in the air grew heavier with every second. Bruce Lee, however, remained completely still. No fear, no anger, no panic, just calm breathing and sharp focus. The Viking suddenly stopped a few meters away, planting the axe firmly into the snow as a warning. The metal struck the frozen ground with a dull, heavy sound that made several people in the crowd step back. The cold wind blew harder, and the silence became almost unbearable. At that moment, everyone realized something important. This wasn't just a challenge. This was going to be a test of strength, control, and courage in one of the harshest conditions imaginable. And while the Viking looked ready for battle, Bruce Lee looked like a man who had already won in his mind. The freezing air continued to move through the forest, and the real challenge had only just begun. The cold wind kept moving through the forest, carrying small flakes of snow across the frozen ground. The crowd tightened their coats and rubbed their hands together, trying to stay warm, but their attention never left the two men standing in the center of the clearing. Everyone was watching Bruce Lee. It didn't make sense to them. How could someone stand so calmly in -9 degrees Celsius, weather wearing light training clothes? Even the Viking, who was used to extreme cold, was protected by layers of fur and leather. Yet Bruce Lee stood there as if he were in a normal training hall, completely relaxed and unaffected by the freezing temperature. A man in the crowd whispered to his friend, "Is he crazy? He's going to freeze before the fight even starts." Another person quietly replied, "Or maybe he knows something we don't." The Viking pulled the axe out of the snow and lifted it onto his shoulder. His heavy breathing created thick clouds of white mist in the air. He studied Bruce Lee carefully, trying to understand what kind of man would accept such a challenge in this environment. Bruce Lee slowly shifted his feet, adjusting his balance on the slippery snow. His movements were small and controlled, almost invisible, but they showed complete awareness of the ground beneath him. He wasn't just standing there, he was preparing. The Viking noticed this. He narrowed his eyes. This wasn't the behavior of a scared man. This was the behavior of someone who was waiting for the right moment. The crowd slowly stopped laughing. A strange silence spread through the clearing as people began to feel something different in the air. The confidence they had in the Vikings started to weaken, and curiosity began to take its place. Why wasn't Bruce Lee reacting to the cold? Why wasn't he showing any fear of the axe? And most importantly, why did he look so calm? The Viking took a slow step forward, testing Bruce Lee's reaction. Nothing changed. Bruce Lee's breathing remained steady. His shoulders were relaxed, and his eyes stayed focused on the Viking's movements. It was as if he was studying every small detail, the way the Viking held the axe, the way his boots pressed into the snow, even the rhythm of his breathing. The Viking suddenly swung the axe lightly in the air, not to attack, but to show his strength. The sharp metal cut through the cold wind with a heavy whooshing sound, making several people in the crowd step back nervously. Still, Bruce Lee did not move. A faint smile appeared on his face. That smile confused everyone. It wasn't a smile of arrogance. It wasn't a smile of fear. It was the smile of someone who understood the situation better than anyone else. The Viking felt it too. For the first time, a small doubt entered his mind. He had fought many warriors before. He had seen fear, anger, and panic in his opponent's eyes. But this calmness was different. It was unsettling. The cold wind grew stronger, blowing snow across the ground and slightly reducing visibility. The temperature continued to drop, and even the Viking's hands tightened around the axe handle as the freezing air touched his skin. But Bruce Lee stood like a mountain, unshaken, unmoved, untouched by fear or cold. The crowd was no longer laughing now. They were watching in complete silence. And deep inside, many of them were starting to realize something strange. Maybe this wasn't a simple fight. Maybe the Viking had misunderstood the man standing in front of him. Because Bruce Lee wasn't just standing in the cold. He was waiting for the Viking to make the first mistake. The air had grown even colder. Every breath the crowd took hung in the air like smoke, and the snow crunched sharply under the Viking's boots. His axe gleamed in the pale winter sunlight, a symbol of raw power and deadly intent. He was used to facing warriors in battle, men who feared nothing, yet something about Bruce Lee unsettled him. "Stand still, or I'll show you the end," the Viking shouted, his deep voice echoing across the forest. The axe lifted slowly, then swung in a short, controlled arc, just enough to make the metal whistle through the frigid air. The crowd flinched. Some whispered to each other, "This is insane." The Viking could kill him in one swing. But Bruce Lee didn't move. Not an inch. His calm, focused stare remained locked on the Viking, reading every subtle motion in his posture, every shift of weight, every flex of muscle. The Viking's brow furrowed. He had expected fear. He had expected hesitation. Yet here stood a man who seemed almost untouchable, completely in control, as if the freezing temperature, the axe, and the threat itself were irrelevant. "Are you mocking me?" the Viking growled, stepping closer. The axe's edge scraped the snow, leaving a shallow furrow. Still, Bruce Lee's expression remained calm. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips, but it was not a smile of disrespect. It was a smile that unnerved the Viking, a silent reminder that power isn't always visible. The Viking raised the axe high, preparing for a more forceful swing. His muscles tensed. He felt the cold bite at his skin, but adrenaline coursed through his veins. He would not be defeated, not by a man in light clothing, not in this freezing wasteland. "Move, or this ends now," he barked, his voice sharp, commanding. The snow fell silently around them, the forest holding its breath. The crowd instinctively stepped back, sensing the danger. Yet in the midst of this tension, Bruce Lee remained entirely composed. He shifted his weight subtly, barely noticeable, his body ready, balanced, and perfectly aligned. The Viking swung the axe in a wide arc, testing Bruce Lee's reflexes. The blade cut through the air, sharp and menacing, but Bruce Lee didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted slightly, just enough to let the swing pass harmlessly beside him. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some gasped. Others stared, frozen with disbelief. How could anyone survive a strike like that? How could someone face a Viking in the cold and remain untouched? The Viking froze for a moment, feeling frustration bubble inside him. His confidence had been absolute, yet this man, this martial artist, didn't act like a normal opponent. Fear, hesitation, or panic, any of these would have made him vulnerable. But Bruce Lee exhibited none. His eyes locked with the Vikings, and for a moment, it wasn't just a physical confrontation. It was a battle of wills. Every subtle movement, every controlled breath, every calm stance communicated a single message. "I am not afraid. I am ready. You will make the mistake." The Viking took a step forward, the axe poised for a strike that could end it all. Yet deep inside, a seed of doubt had been planted. This man was different, stronger, faster, smarter than any foe he had faced before. The snow continued to swirl, the cold intensified, and the forest seemed to shrink around them. Every spectator knew something critical had just shifted. The fight was no longer just a clash of brute strength. It was now a game of anticipation, of strategy, of who could truly dominate without losing control. And in that moment, one thing became terrifyingly clear. Bruce Lee wasn't just ready. He was in complete command. The Viking gritted his teeth, raised the axe higher, and prepared to strike again. But this time, the air felt different. The challenge was no longer simple. Something was coming that no one, not even the Viking, could predict. The tension was unbearable. Every second stretched longer. Every movement counted, and the forest waited. The Viking's axe hovered mid-air, frozen in a moment of tension. Every spectator could feel the weight of that single second. It wasn't just cold that gripped the clearing now. It was the aura of pure anticipation. The forest seemed to shrink around the two figures, the snow falling slower, almost as if nature itself was holding its breath. And then, something unexpected happened. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't take a defensive stance. He didn't tighten his fists or step back. He didn't even shift his eyes away from the Viking's gaze. He stood perfectly still, his breathing slow, controlled, almost meditative. The faint smile remained on his face, not mocking, not fearful, but calm, unsettlingly calm. The Viking blinked. He had been expecting fear, hesitation, panic, anything that would reveal weakness. But this was different. This was serenity in the face of raw danger. The kind of calm that made the mind question reality. It was almost as if Bruce Lee didn't even see the axe as a threat. A small gust of wind blew snowflakes across his shoulders, and they melted into the fabric of his light training clothes. The crowd shivered in their heavy coats, yet Bruce Lee's body was unaffected. His muscles were relaxed but ready. Every fiber of his being exuded control, precision, and readiness. The Viking gritted his teeth. His confidence wavered ever so slightly. He had trained his whole life to read opponents, to sense their fear, their hesitation, their weaknesses. But Bruce Lee's calm was impenetrable. It was as though he had predicted every possible outcome and had prepared for each one. "You are fearless," the Viking muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. But fear wasn't the word. It wasn't fear. It was respect, or maybe confusion. The Viking had never encountered a man who could radiate such control without even raising a hand in defense. Bruce Lee tilted his head slightly, eyes narrowing. It was a subtle movement, almost imperceptible, but it carried meaning. He wasn't reacting to the Viking's aggression. He was observing, calculating, understanding every nuance of the attack, every rhythm in the axe's swing. The crowd couldn't take their eyes off him. Some whispered, others gasped, but all of them felt it, the calm of a master. The kind of calm that turns chaos into opportunity. The kind that makes a weapon feel irrelevant. The Viking swung the axe again, this time with more force, more aggression. The blade cut through the air with a sharp hiss, a deadly sound in the freezing forest. Yet Bruce Lee moved only slightly, a subtle adjustment of his stance, a shift of his weight, and the axe passed harmlessly by. A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. Some of the strongest men they had ever seen in combat would have faltered in this moment. But Bruce Lee, unshaken, unmoved, almost untouchable. The Viking froze mid-swing. That smile, the faint, quiet smile, gnawed at him. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't mockery. It was a signal that something greater was about to happen. That calm, that control, that focus, it was more powerful than any axe, more threatening than any physical strike. And in that frozen moment, the Viking realized something terrifying. This wasn't a fight he could control with brute force. This was a battle he could only lose if he didn't respect the calm, mental dominance of the man in front of him. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He didn't rush. He simply waited. The crowd held its collective breath. The forest was silent. And the Viking, who had never doubted his strength before, now doubted everything. Because this calm, this impossible, serene calm, was a warning. And it was only the beginning. The forest was deathly silent now. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, letting the snowflakes drift slowly to the ground as if afraid to disturb the moment. The Viking's axe hovered mid-swing, its deadly edge glinting in the pale sunlight. Every spectator was frozen in place, unsure whether to cheer, gasp, or simply stare in disbelief. Bruce Lee didn't move, not an inch. His calm presence was so powerful that it seemed to distort the world around him. The cold, the snow, the blustering Viking, it was all irrelevant. He was focused, still, a calm eye at the center of storm. The Viking's confidence had begun to waver. He had fought countless opponents, men who prided themselves on fearlessness and aggression. Yet none had ever withstood his intimidation in the way Bruce Lee did. His calm was not ordinary. It was calculated, precise, and unshakable. A subtle twitch of Bruce Lee's wrist, barely perceptible to anyone but the trained eye, sent a shiver down the Viking's spine. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a threat. It was a signal that everything the Viking believed about strength, control, and fear was about to be challenged. The crowd leaned in. Their breaths, visible in the cold air, formed small clouds that disappeared quickly into the winter sky. Every eye was locked on Bruce Lee, trying to understand how a man in light training clothes could radiate more power than a Viking with an axe twice his size. Then, Bruce Lee shifted his weight ever so slightly. It was just a fraction of an inch, but enough to create suspense that the Viking felt deep in his bones. The axe felt heavier. The wind seemed sharper. Time seemed slower. The Viking's pulse quickened. Doubt crept in where there had been none before. He swung the axe again, harder, faster, more aggressively. The metal whistled through the air like a warning, cutting the space between them. But Bruce Lee didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He didn't even breathe differently. His eyes remained calm, studying the Viking's every movement, calculating the timing, the rhythm, the angles. The crowd could feel it. The suspense was unbearable. Some people held their hands to their mouths. Others stepped back instinctively. Everyone understood, on some instinctual level, that this was not a normal fight. This was not about strength or size. This was about anticipation, focus, and mental dominance. A small shiver ran through the Viking, not from the cold, but from the realization that he was up against something extraordinary. The calm in Bruce Lee's eyes, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint, almost imperceptible smile, it was all a challenge that went deeper than physical combat. "You are not afraid," the Viking muttered under his breath, a mixture of fear, disbelief, and grudging respect. Bruce Lee tilted his head slightly, his gaze never leaving the Vikings. It was a simple movement, but in that moment, it felt like a threat. Not a threat of physical harm, but a mental one. The kind of threat that unnerves a man long before his body can react. The Viking's grip tightened on the axe. The muscles in his arms burned. He had underestimated this man. He had expected fear, hesitation, panic, but none came. Instead, Bruce Lee's calm was almost magnetic, pulling attention, focus, and even doubt straight into the Viking's mind. The suspense was unbearable. Every second stretched into eternity. Every movement mattered. Every breath counted. And in that frozen, silent moment, it became clear this fight was no longer just about brute force. It was a battle of anticipation, calculation, and control. Bruce Lee was not just standing in the snow. He was in complete command of the moment. And the Viking was about to realize that his first mistake, underestimating him, would be the most dangerous one he would ever make. The forest was quiet, but the tension was deafening. Every snowflake falling seemed louder than a drumbeat. The Viking's axe hovered mid-air, the steel edge reflecting pale sunlight, but his mind was elsewhere. Doubt had crept in, subtle but undeniable. He had faced strong warriors before, but none like this. Bruce Lee's calm was unsettling. It wasn't just that he didn't flinch in the freezing cold. It was the way he stood, perfectly balanced, every muscle relaxed yet ready, like a coiled spring waiting for the precise moment to release. Every spectator could feel it. He wasn't relying on strength. He was relying on something far more dangerous: control. The Viking swung the axe again, this time with more force. The wind whistled past the metal, and snow flew in every direction. But Bruce Lee barely moved. He shifted his weight just slightly, a whisper of motion that allowed the axe to pass harmlessly by. The crowd gasped. Some whispered, "Did you see that?" He didn't even touch him. Even the Viking paused for a moment. His chest heaved with exertion, his grip tightening. He had expected resistance, but not this. The man before him wasn't just surviving. He was dominating the psychological battlefield. Bruce Lee took a single step forward. Not aggressively, not recklessly, just a calm, deliberate step. His eyes never left the Viking, and yet, somehow, that small motion changed everything. The Viking felt a shift, almost like the snow beneath his boots had grown slippery, even though it hadn't. His heart raced, his mind calculated every possible reaction, but none of it mattered. Bruce Lee had already anticipated it. The crowd held their breath. They could see the Viking's confidence slipping. His swings became slightly slower, less precise, as the mental pressure of Bruce Lee's presence bore down on him. The calm, serene energy radiating from the martial artist was more formidable than any weapon. Then came the subtle hint of power. A tiny, almost imperceptible movement of Bruce Lee's hands, barely noticeable, caused the Viking to instinctively shift his stance. His mind screamed caution, but it was too late. The psychological impact was already in motion. Every swing, every thought, every reaction of the Viking was now under Bruce Lee's silent control. The crowd started whispering, "He's not just surviving, he's controlling him," one spectator muttered. Another shook their head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this, not even in legends." Bruce Lee didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His calmness was louder than any battle cry, sharper than any axe. The Viking's own body betrayed him, tightening where it should have relaxed, hesitating where he should have struck. The invisible pressure, the dominance of mental clarity over brute force, was suffocating. A faint smile appeared on Bruce Lee's face again. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't mockery. It was a signal. The power of control. The mastery of timing. The silent lesson that strength without precision, speed without awareness, and power without calm can all be destroyed before a single blow lands. The Viking's axe lowered slightly, a subtle but telling sign. His mind raced, trying to recapture control, but he could feel it slipping. Bruce Lee's presence was a force in itself, unseen, yet undeniable. Every swing, every threat, every attempt to intimidate was slowly turning against him. The snow continued to fall, the cold burned, but Bruce Lee stood untouched, unshaken, unmovable. The crowd's eyes widened as the realization set in. This wasn't just a fight of physical skill. This was a demonstration of mental dominance, a display of a force far stronger than raw strength. And in that chilling winter forest, with the Viking's axe heavy in the air and doubt filling his mind, it became terrifyingly clear. Bruce Lee was about to show exactly what happens when true control meets recklessness. The forest had become a frozen stage, every detail amplified by the biting cold. Snowflakes drifted lazily to the ground, but no one noticed them anymore. All eyes were on the two figures at the center of the clearing. The Viking, massive and tense, axe raised, and Bruce Lee, calm, poised, and unervingly composed. The Viking's breath came in heavy, visible bursts, each exhale a cloud of frost in the frigid air. He had swung his axe repeatedly, testing Bruce Lee, trying to assert dominance. But each attempt had been met with that impossible calm, that unshakable presence. The realization that he was not in control began to gnaw at him. He took a deep breath and swung again, this time with a force that could shatter bone. The metal sliced through the air with a terrifying hiss. Snow exploded outward from the swing, and the crowd instinctively took a step back. Some gasped, others froze completely, unsure if they should move closer or run. Bruce Lee did nothing. Not a flinch, not a dodge. He shifted slightly, a whisper of movement that seemed almost like a natural flow of balance, and the axe missed him by inches. The Viking's eyes widened. How could a man with no weapon, no armor, and minimal clothing withstand such power? His confidence wavered. For the first time, fear crept into his mind. You're not human, the Viking muttered under his breath, the words escaping before he could stop them. His grip on the axe tightened, but his arms shook slightly, betraying the tension that had infiltrated his mind. Bruce Lee's eyes remained fixed on him, sharp and calculating. A faint smile appeared on his lips, subtle, yet magnetic. It was a smile that conveyed absolute certainty, a quiet message that the Viking could neither attack nor control the situation. That calm, that mastery, was more powerful than any swing of steel. The crowd held their collective breath. They could feel the mental struggle even more than the physical one. The Viking's strength, his aggression, his weapon, it all meant nothing against the force radiating from Bruce Lee's presence. The martial artist didn't move with speed. He moved with timing. He didn't attack with force. He controlled perception, emotion, and reaction. A small gust of wind blew through the clearing, swirling snow around their feet. The Viking swung again, more aggressively, hoping to break through. But Bruce Lee's body was a coiled instrument of precision. Every step, every shift of weight, every subtle adjustment allowed him to remain untouchable. The axe, once a symbol of ultimate power, now felt almost cumbersome. The Viking's mind raced. He had underestimated the man standing in front of him. He had thought strength, size, and brute force would be enough. But he had forgotten one thing: control over oneself, and the situation is stronger than any weapon in hand. Every instinct, every muscle in his body screamed at him that he was in danger, but not from Bruce Lee's fists. From Bruce Lee's mind. A faint, almost imperceptible chuckle escaped Bruce Lee. It wasn't loud, but it echoed in the Viking's thoughts. The sound carried calm, confidence, and a quiet warning. The moment for the axe to strike recklessly had passed. The real threat wasn't physical. It was mental. The Viking's arms grew heavier, the swings slower. His confidence shattered, and yet he didn't lower the axe. Pride, fear, and stubbornness kept him poised to strike, even as doubt consumed him. Bruce Lee shifted slightly, just enough to indicate movement, but it wasn't clear what he intended. The audience could barely perceive the motion, yet it was enough to make every spectator lean forward. Something was coming. Something the Viking couldn't anticipate. Something no one in that forest had ever witnessed. The axe hovered. The Viking's eyes darted to Bruce Lee, trying to read him, to predict the impossible. But Bruce Lee's calm, his control, his presence, created a psychological trap. The Viking's mind was racing, his body tense, and the audience was trapped too, mentally, emotionally on the edge of their seats. Bruce Lee's faint smile widened just slightly. It was a signal, not of attack, not yet, but of inevitability. The Viking had made a mistake he didn't even know he was making. A single misstep could change everything. The forest seemed to hold its breath with them. Snow swirled, the wind paused, and time stretched. Every eye was locked on Bruce Lee. Every thought in the Viking's mind was consumed with doubt. Every heartbeat in the crowd echoed like a drum. And in that frozen, suspense-filled moment, it became terrifyingly clear. The Viking was about to discover the true power of calm, control, and mastery. What happens next, no one could predict.